in the words of the Torah. Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asak b'divrei Torah. Please, Yehovah, make the Torah's words sweet in my mouth, in the mouth of all your people, the house of Israel. May we, your children, all of Israel, know your name and the name of your Messiah, Yeshua. May we study your Torah simply because it is good. Blessed are you, Yehovah, who gave us the Torah of truth. Are we ready? We who live in the shelter of Elyon spend our nights in the shadow of Shaddai, who say to Adonai, our refuge, our fortress, our God, in whom we trust. He will rescue us from the trap of the hunter, from the plague of calamities. He will cover us with his pinions, and under his wings we will find refuge. His truth is a shield and protection. We will not fear the terrors of night, or the arrow that flies by day, or the plague that roams in the dark, or the scourge that wreaks havoc at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it won't come near us. Only keep our eyes open, and we will see how the wicked are punished. For we have made Adonai the Most High, who is our refuge, our dwelling place. No disaster will happen to us. No calamity will come near our tent, for he will order his angels to care for us and guard us wherever we go. They will carry us in their hands so that we won't trip on a stone. We will tread down lions and snakes and young lions and serpents we will trample underfoot. Because he loves me, I will rescue him. Because he knows my name, I will protect him. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him when he is in trouble. I will extricate him and bring him honor. I will satisfy him with long life and show him my salvation. Get a Lord a shout before you have a seat. A shout and a seat. Glory to Yehovah. Well, in case you didn't know, we're in the book of Job. We are in chapter 10, verses 1 through 22. We've been hitting chapters at a time because they are speeches. We are actually in the first cycle of speeches. There's actually 3 cycles of speeches from each friend. So we're in the first cycle. If we look at Job chapter 10, verses 1 through 22, we're going to look at verses 1 and 2 very quickly. We know that this is a continuation of Job's speech after Bildad had spoken. And we know that he's spoke to Bildad, and then we kind of see that it was shifted, and he began to speak to Yehovah. Throw some things out there. Again, I don't want to gross you out, but you just have to remember what he's been through. What he's been through in 10 days. And then sitting in that sickness, along with the grief and agony, along with the confusion of trying to figure out what spiritual understanding this is to align his theology with the circumstances that he's gone through for months. He doesn't have an ally in that his wife is not sitting beside him saying, honey, it's going to be okay. I would imagine after being called a low-class woman, you might want to leave and go to the house if you had one left, or your mother's house or somewhere. The friends are there, but they're only there to get him to understand that if he would just repent of his sins, then God would restore him. I don't think he has a problem of repenting of sins if he could figure it out. But as a man of integrity, he doesn't want to say something just to say something. And really, if he made it up, the situation is not going to change because there's no sin to repent of. Now, I know he's not perfect, but he certainly is blameless and righteous according to Yehovah's eyes, correct? And that there is no punishment coming for an out-of-order life or a life that he's caused chaos. So when we look at verses 1 and 2, it says, I am just worn out. How many's ever been there? Anyone been worn out? And I'm not just talking about the day. I'm talking about situation after situation, circumstance after circumstance. It looks like you're not ever going to get a break, and he is just basically saying, I am just worn out. By my life, I swear, I will never abandon my complaint. I will speak out in my soul's bitterness. I will say to God, don't condemn me. Tell me why you are contending with me. Now, remember, we talked about an arbitration. He said if I could have at least a moment in the courtroom of God, maybe I could say what I needed to say, and maybe I would be found not guilty. But we also know, he said, but you know more than I do. You know my life, so it wouldn't work out quite well when you have someone who knows you and knows your heart. Because even at court, you only say what you have to say. You don't reveal everything unless you're just new to court. You just say what needs to be said. And so there's nothing that he could really say that could outwit Yeshua. So since there's no arbitrator, Job is left only to abhor his present state. Since he cannot get a mediated audience with Yehovah in a courtroom, he will speak freely in the here and now. He has nothing to lose. And remember, we know that even what he could lose is his life, and at this moment, he would welcome that. You know, if God would come down and strike him, he'd be like, okay, thank you for putting me out of my misery. So in the absence of this arbitrator, he will speak in the bitterness of his soul, and with passion and emotion, he will actually argue his case directly with Yehovah. So these speeches, part of it is to the friends, part of it is to God. He is actually just, again, arguing his case. What does he want God to do? To speak. Now remember, God is with him. God never left him nor forsook him, correct? So that's even part of the frustration, because you sense him, you know he's there, and yet he's quiet. Those who he doesn't want to hear from are not quiet, and the one who he wants to hear from is quiet. And a lot of times when we're going through things, we don't necessarily hear God a lot. We read his word, try to glean from it, but again, if we went through something and we said, God, explain it, and he explained it to us, we wouldn't need faith sometimes. We wouldn't need to trust him in everything, because he would have the immediate answer for us. That's all we'd have to say. So sometimes he's quiet. You know, the scripture says that he does what with us through the valley of the shadow of death? He what? He walks. Doesn't say he speaks. Just says he walks. Right? Which means he's walking, you sense him, you feel him, you know he's there, but he's not telling you what is going on. He didn't say to the disciples, get in the boat, there's going to be a storm, but don't worry about it. You might get afraid, but I'll come and I'll rescue you. He didn't say that. He said, go to the other side, knowing there's going to be a full-fledged storm coming. Correct? And when he gets there, he doesn't explain why the storm is there. He just says, here I am. Why are you afraid? So in the absence of this arbitrator, he is going to feel like he can just spew what needs to be spewed. And in that verse 2, he says, listen, don't condemn me. Don't pronounce me guilty. Show me the charges you are bringing against me. Make a full disclosure of your case against me, because I just really need to know why I'm sitting here with such great loss and such great agony, spiritually, physically, mentally. I would at least appreciate you to tell me why I'm going through what I'm going through. So then we go to verse 3 that says, do you gain some advantage from oppressing, from spurning what your own hands made, from shining on the schemes of the wicked? Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see a human see? Are you days like the days of mortals? Are your years like human years, that you have to seek my guilt and search out my sin? You know that I won't be condemned, yet no one can rescue me from your power. Getting a little bold. Getting a little bold. But who hasn't gotten a little bold with God? Now, you won't proclaim it. You might not share it. But in the hours in the morning when it's just you and God, or even if you're pretending you're not even talking to God, you still say things. And you think just because you don't say, hey, God, that you're not really coming to him. He hears you, correct? So verse 3 says, do you gain some advantage from oppressing, from spurning what your own hands made, from shining on the schemes of the wicked? So in speaking for himself, Job also gives this voice, not only for himself, but to the many godly people who, it appears, have suffered at the hands of an all-powerful deity. He's not the first one to go through something. He won't be the last one to go through something. And so he's locking this in that if I'm blameless and righteous to go through this, then I know that other people were blameless and righteous, and they went through some things. So why in the world would us, blameless and righteous people, go through something? Are you someone who sides with the wicked one? Now, when we look at that, in verse 3, do you gain some advantage from oppressing? The opening words either mean, is this a good thing morally in your sight? Is this something that when you look at it, you say, check, it's okay? Or does this benefit you in some way? And so when we look at those two meanings, we find that they kind of overlap because those two concepts really overlap each other, and that's exactly what he's saying. So he's demonstrating this extraordinary courage and this moral tenacity, and he feels that he can challenge Jehovah right here. After all, it's not Jehovah the ultimate standard of goodness and righteousness, and if that's the case, then he can ask. If Yahweh considers it a good thing to oppress, that word also means defraud, and kind of like oppress better than defraud, because defraud has a kind of a, I know oppress is bad, but defraud to me seems a little worse. And then to spurn the very works of his hands. If you are righteous, if you are good, then I'm going to ask you, does this feel right to you? Is this something that seems right to you? Is this just? Is this good? Why would Jehovah do such a hard work to make sure only after creating me and loving me and helping me, why would he then want to destroy me? Doesn't make sense to him, as some of our own situations and circumstances certainly don't make sense to us. Now, adding insult to injury, he appears gloriously on behalf of the counsel of the wicked, which is what he's saying. I cannot believe. Here's what's going on. You say you love, you say you're good, and you say you're righteous, but yet it looks like you are on the side of the counsel of the wicked, because if you are my refuge and my strength, then you should be rescuing me. And if you're not rescuing me, then it looks like you're on their side. If you ever had a fight with someone, maybe, and there's 3 people in the room, and you really had said something and someone has taken offense to it, and you really believe that what you said was true and it wasn't meant in malice or whatever, and the friend is there and you say, well, you know, that's not what I meant, and the friend is silent. Now what do you want to do to the friend? Because you're looking for an ally, correct? And so if you're quiet, then God, it must mean that you are, on behalf of the counsel of the wicked, you are standing with them. And Jehovah has manifested his power and glory on their behalf, because we know that nothing can be done without you. Kind of like what Mike James said. The thing is, did God do it or didn't God do it? Even though the devil did it, didn't God allow it to happen? Now, if you want to ride around on that, track, that'll drive you crazy for a long period of time. The exact opposite of what he was expected to do. He was expected that God would come and rescue him, right? Look at Psalms 94, verse 1 and 3 that says, because this is the contrast of Job 10:3. God of vengeance, Adonai, God of vengeance, appear. Assert yourself as judge of the earth. Pay back the proud as they deserve. How long are the wicked, Adonai? How long are the wicked to triumph? Which means God's going to come to your aid. And this is all that Job is kind of asking. So not only is Jehovah guilty of oppressing or defrauding and despising the work of his hands, because who created Job? He did. He appears in support of the counsel of the wicked. Now, that's one thing that you would say, listen, if God is for me, who can be against me? And if everyone's against me, and then I feel that God's against me, what hope do I have? Right? Now, let's look at verse 4 and 5. He continues on. Do you have eyes of flesh? Question. Do you see as humans see? Question mark. Are your days like the days of mortals? Are your years like human years? So these questions, it would be centuries before Yehovah, through Yeshua, could answer. Because Yeshua comes and he has what? Eyes of flesh. Yeshua comes and he can see as a human sees. He is living the days of mortality, correct? And he's living with the years of human years. So when Job is asking, do you have eyes of flesh? Yehovah's going to say, I will. Can you see as humans see? I will. The time is not yet, but I will. Okay? So Yeshua is going to be able to answer that, and the answer would be yes. Now, underscoring the importance of the incarnation of the level of identification, because we need to understand, what does Yeshua do? And what does Yeshua say? I felt everything you've ever felt, every infirmity, everything that you're feeling. So, look at Hebrews chapter 2, 14 through 18. It says, therefore, since the children share a common physical nature as human beings, he became like them, shared that same human nature, so that by his death he might render ineffective the one who had power over death, that is, the adversary, and thus set free those who had been in bondage all their lives because of the fear of death. Indeed, it is obvious that he does not hold of angels to help them. He does not take hold of angels to help them. On the contrary, he takes hold of the seed of Abraham. This is why he had to become like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful, faithful Contd in the service of God, making a kapara for the sins of the people. For since he himself suffered death when he was put to the test, he is able to help those who are being what? Tested when? Now. Such a loving God. Now, that's not what Job wants to hear at this moment, but it will be true. In Hebrews chapter 4, 14 through 16, therefore, since we have this great Contd who has passed through the highest heaven, Yeshua, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we acknowledge as true. For we do not have a Contd unable to empathize with our weaknesses, since in every respect he was tempted just as we are, the only difference being that he did not sin. Therefore, let us confidently approach the throne from which God gives grace, so that we may receive mercy, find grace in our time of need. Which means he knows everything that we've gone through, will go through, felt, experienced, situations, circumstances, testings, and trials. Again, you might say, well, this is mine, I don't see it written. Again, the feelings of what those trials make you feel like, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, those are the ways that we are challenged, correct? 3 different ways. They all have a different manifestation in different ways in each and one of our lives. So we all go through something, circumstances, situations, but the feelings are the same. Grief is grief. Hurt is hurt. Bitterness is bitterness. Correct? They're the root. However, it looks like, I might not be able to say, oh, yeah, I went through what you went through, but I probably can say I went through something that makes me feel the same way you are feeling in some way, somehow. Correct? Maybe at a different level. Correct? Maybe not as high, maybe not as low, but there's not that many feelings out there. Right? Hate and love. Compassion or bitterness. I mean, write them down. There's not that many. We know how many fruit of the Spirit are there. 9. So that means if there's 9 fruit of the Spirit, there probably also are 9 opposites of the fruit of the Spirit. So you can only really have 9 emotions. You want to look at it that way. Thank God for that. Because some of our emotions are way out there. Can you imagine how many more? So then verse 6 and 7 says that you have to seek my guilt and search out my sin. You know that I won't be condemned, yet no one can rescue me from your power. Now, if we look at verses 4 and 5, 4 and 5 have not been more abstract, but leads into kind of Job's point. And Job's point is this, that you're acting towards me like some small-minded, fault-finding, petty human being, and that you are seeking out my iniquity and searching for my sin. We say things like this: don't judge me. Because we feel when someone's judging us, they're fault-finding, right? They are small-minded. You should be thinking something else. They are petty human beings that are so focused on someone else and not your own. And we'll tell them that. You need to focus on your own self. And then we'll throw spiritual things out there. What's in your eye? Leave mine in my eye. You take care of yours in your eye. When you get yours out of your eye, then come to see me. But I know it's going to be a long time before you get here, because your log seems to be big. So he's just asking, why would you do that? Such really activities are kind of beneath you, because you are God. These are not activities that are beneath us. We are small-minded. We are petty. We like to find fault. And the reason why we like to do that is because it makes us feel okay. Right? We find the person who's worse than we are, and that's when we say, well, at least. We don't set a higher standard. We look for the lower standard so that we can just kind of get in. Right? We're like those people that say, well, if I don't get in the marriage supper of the Lamb, do I still get into heaven? I do? Okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with just getting in. We don't want to just get in. But that's how we kind of even live our lives, correct? And so he's saying, listen, this activity is beneath you, especially when you know that I am not guilty. Did you read what he said? I won't be condemned because you won't find anything that I know of. I've been searching now for a very long time, because that's all I got to do sitting here in this puddle of pus. Job remains convinced that his case would prevail in a court of law, since he is at heart a righteous and upright man of moral, spiritual integrity, and what he has suffered is only deserved by the truly wicked. So he's asking Jehovah not to search his life in such detail that he would be able to say, gotcha. People like to say, gotcha. They like to find that moment when you fail. Gotcha. Right? As if what Jehovah found out would outweigh the consistent track record of Job's life. Here's something. As horrible as Job's life is, I want God to judge me, not you. Because at the end of the day, he is more merciful and gracious than any human being I know of. Because he knows my heart. And I could tell you as a human being my heart, but you will not believe it. But he knows it. Correct? Which is why I'm so glad it's not up to you or I to judge people at the end of the day. Again, we might say because he's kind of, prideful. He's saying that he wouldn't be condemned, that he is a blameless and righteous man. He can't figure out anything that would be done in his life. And you would say, well, my theology says that there is no good people. My theology says in Romans 3:23 that there is none righteous. Say it with me, you know it. No, not one. Now, everyone that's one, raise your hand, because you are the no, not one. Correct? Yeah, but we have to understand that can there not be any righteous people, and then can you be righteous? And the answer would be yes. Right? That's a very understanding the Hebrew way of thinking, correct? It doesn't make sense to our Greek thinking. But remember, from a very biblical perspective and with recognition of Jehovah's gracious help, there are good people in the world, and they are called righteous people. Abraham was called righteous. David was called righteous and holy. Job is called blameless and righteous. So if anyone's going to define righteous and holy, and if God calls someone righteous and holy, even though Romans 3:23 said there's none righteous, no, not one, you have to keep it in perspective. Correct? In fact, believers in the New Testament were called saints. I know that's a far cry from what you could probably call yourself. Maybe when you die, that's probably why they wait now. When people die, we'll call them a saint. Well, yeah, anyone dead could be a saint. They're also called holy ones. And here's the thing about Job. He's not being arrogant, but Job knows that he is in the class of people, that class of people. He is righteous. He is holy. Correct? You might not consider yourself powerfully righteous or holy, but you know whether you're born again or not born again, even in your failure. And you can have the same failure that someone who's not born again and have that same addiction and the same problem, same situation. But you know that you've asked him into your heart, and you know that he's working with you. So you can say, I know I'm not a sinner. I am born again. I might sin, but I'm not a sinner, right? So to put these verses, 6 and 7, in the context of Christian theology, one might say that Job's argument is, while I am fully aware that no human being is perfectly righteous in your sight, and you can easily find fault with any of us, you know that I am not a wicked person, and I have feared you and conducted myself with honor before you. You know that. Even though, if you wanted to, you could find fault in the way I breathe. You could reveal my brain and my mind and know I'm not worthy. So let's go to verses 8 through 11. Your own hands shaped me. They made me. So why do you turn and destroy me? Please remember that you made me like clay. Will you return me to dust? Didn't you pour me out like milk, then let me thicken like cheese? You clothe me with skin and flesh. You knit me together with bones and sinews. Now, here's Job. If we look at verse 8, your own hands shaped me. They made me. So why do you turn and destroy me? Job brings a very personal, stinging indictment to God. What kind of God makes something and then destroys what he created? Now, when we look at this, you understand something. This is going to help a lot of people because Job understands conception and formation. In the womb to have been or is the personal activity of the Creator. Look what he says, you have shaped me. Anyone that has conceived, you've conceived by biology, but God is shaping and creating. It's by his hand. Okay? Like a potter with raw materials, Jehovah shaped the embryo with care and skill. So the contradiction between his care and then ruthless destruction in the present is the theme. He doesn't get it. Because I'm not an accident that came. I am something that you formed. And if we go back to chapters 1 and 2, remember there was a prophecy about him, remember? That he was coming, right? That God had a plan for him. So therefore, God is creating and shaping and making. So and then verse 9, he says, please remember that you made me like clay. Will you return me to dust? He appeals to him. Remember. Remember that I am clay, not steel. Which, what he's saying is, the longer I'm in this predicament, you know I can't handle it. I know that he says he won't give you any more than you can bear, and Job is just reminding him what he's made of. I am just flesh. And being made out of clay, I am frail. Right? Do y'all remember that illustrated sermon I had with the pottery? All the pottery I had up here? And then what did I do with that pottery? Anyone remember? I broke it. Right? Broke it into pieces. And as beautiful as that pottery was, it only took a moment to crush it. So he's saying, listen, I am clay, I am not steel, I am frail, I'm not worthy of constant scrutiny or hardly a target worthy of your wrath. I would explode in a minute, and I'm about ready to. Plus, aren't you supposed to be compassionate? Isn't he the compassionate one? Job could have called the psalmist actually even to testify against Jehovah. In Psalms 103, verse 14, it talks about the power of God and the compassionate one. How about using the word of God against God? How about that? How many would like to do that? Psalms 103:14, for he understands how we are made. He remembers that we are dust. So it's not like he forgets, right? So then verses 11 and 10 says, didn't you pour me out like milk, then let me thicken like cheese? You clothed me with skin and flesh, and you knit me together with bones and sinews. And so Job here, he's reminding Jehovah that he was fashioned, formed, created. Job understands pro-life. If you want to understand pro-life, then look at Job, because Job gets it. Job understands that life begins at the point of conception, and that it is a person for whom Jehovah cares for. At the moment of that conception, Jehovah shaping, molding, and cares. Which is why then you look at abortion as horrific, because you're taking the creation that God is shaping, and you're destroying it and yanking it out and murdering it. That's why even when you are, miscarriaging or losing a baby, it's horrific, because he's creating and shaping. Does he know what's going to happen? Certainly. He doesn't stop creating because he knows what's going to happen, or he wouldn't have created Adam and Eve. Correct? So he does, and then life sometimes interrupts, correct? Still, the hand of God is there to walk us through, right? And so then he goes to verse 12 and 13. You granted me life and grace. Your careful attention preserved my spirit. Yet you hid these things in your heart. I know what your secret purpose was. He's basically saying, listen, why would you design something so intimately and with such purpose and precision, only to destroy it so ruthlessly? And he continues, how wonderful it was to live under your tender care. But it was all a setup. You had something malicious in your mind. You're storing this up in your heart. I know this is what you were planning. Destroying me over a trifle, something of little value, was always in the back of your mind. We say things like this: God, why'd you bring me so far, and then this is happening? God, I've serving you all the days of my life, and now you're letting this happen. You're saying the same thing Job is saying, maybe with a little bit more finesse, because you're not sitting. You didn't lose everything, and you're not sitting in a pile of stuff. So you have a little bit more finesse with your word. Remember, his is just reckless and wild and impetuous, and he don't care. Again, depending on the level that you are at, you don't care. If you're not hurt that much, you respond nicely. You get hurt a little bit more, you respond a little rough. You get really, really hurt and your emotions are out, everyone run. Right? Depends on the level. Depends on a given day. Depends on what you've been just through, how you feel that day. How many know it's so easy when you get up and everything's lovely and you feel good and you can move and there's no popping or cracking and and your mind is clear and you spill milk and you're like, oh, that's okay, I'll just get it. Then you wake up that other morning and you're cracking and popping and your mind's not clear and someone spills the milk and you just turn over tables and everything and people are looking at you like it's just milk. But to you, it's more than just milk at this moment, right? So, again, what the rabbi say, according to what Job is going through, we will give him some license, some room before the hammer comes down. Aren't you glad that God knows your heart, that he gives you the room that is necessary to give to you? Now, we might not get it because we just think you exploded and you're ridiculous and you're immature and we don't get it. But aren't you glad that God gives the room? And here's the thing, if we could just only learn to be like God, I know that's a real hard thing to even fathom, to be like him. But he does give us some scripture that tells us who he is and how he's like. Long-suffering, right? 1 Corinthians, what's that wonderful chapter we like to, it went from 1 Corinthians 11, then chapter 12, and then chapter 14. Because we don't like chapter 13. Because chapter 13 is called it's called the impossible chapter. It's only for those who have great grace. Or no, it is the chapter we should strive for. Correct? So verse 14 through 17, then we'll go back and tear it apart. Luke says, to watch until I would sin and then not absolve me of my guilt. If I am wicked, woe to me. But if righteous, I still don't dare raise my head because I am so filled with shame, so soaked in my misery. You rise up to hunt me like a lion, and you keep treating me in such peculiar ways. You keep producing fresh witnesses against me. Your anger against me keeps growing. Your troops assail me wave after wave after wave. Verse 14. To watch until I would sin and then not absolve me of my guilt. Now, you know he knows God's not like that. But where he's at feels like that's where God is. Just watching and waiting for you to fail. Again, he's God, not us. We do watch people and wait for them to fail so we can say something about them. But he's not that way. So what looked like oversight was actually meticulously record-keeping so that one day Yehovah could prove me guilty, is what he's saying. Anyway, accordingly, Yehovah will not even clear Job of his iniquity. Even if he finds something, he won't clear him of it. And then we're still in verse 15. Job continues, if I was guilty, then woe to me. I'll take it. Woe to me if I'm guilty. In other words, if I'm damned when I'm innocent, how much more damned am I if I'm guilty? But we know he doesn't believe that he is, so that's the struggle. If righteous, in verse 15, what he's saying is, I am so degraded in my current estate that I wouldn't lift my head anyway. I am so full of shame and filled with my affliction. Verse 16 says, you rise up to hunt me like a lion, and you keep treating me in such a peculiar ways. Now, if you look at the King James, says, for it increaseth to hunt me like a lion. Or the New Jewish publication says, it is something to be proud of. Something to be proud of. The English Standard Version says, and were my head lifted up. So the thing about verse 16 is that you have to take 16, but you have to carry the thought of 15 into 16. So what it would actually say is, paraphrase, if I dare to lift my head, then you would hunt me like a lion, displaying his wondrous power against me again and again. So guess what? I'm not ever going to lift my head. I am so full of shame. I am such in a state that I believe that if I lift my head, you'll hunt me. So I'm not even going to look up. I'm not even going to give it a moment because I know that it will work against me. Verse 17, you keep producing fresh witnesses against me. Your anger against me keeps growing. Your troops assail me wave after wave. So we have kind of Job's perspective. And from Job's perspective, Yehovah's attack against him is both legal and martial or warlike. As Yehovah produces new witnesses against him, literally what that means is you renew your witnesses against me and increases my vexation against me. My wife, Eliphaz, Bildad, so far. Now, the question is he speaking here of his friends? If not, it is unclear who those additional witnesses would be. But the assault is unrelenting. like a military unit after another comes against me, one after another, never stopping, always coming, always moving forward, always attacking. He doesn't get any relief. I get it only because I read the book. I don't get it in my own life. But to have lost your servants and lost your house and lost your produce and lost everything that is your livelihood, then losing your 10 children, because you know if you lose everything, you still have your 10 children, you got everything. But then to lose your 10 children, and then just as the pancake is flipped, you are now attacked with boils from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. You can't even have any relief on the bottom of your feet. I get it when I read it. I thank the Lord I don't get it in my own life. Verses 18 through 22 then says, why did you bring me out of the womb? I wish I had died there where no eye could see me. I would have been as if I have never existed. I would have been carried from womb to grave. Aren't my days few? So stop. Leave me alone so I can cheer up a little. Before I go the place of no return, to the land of darkness and death, dark gloom, a land of gloom like darkness itself, of dense darkness and utter disorder, where even the light is dark. So verse 18 and 19 kind of leads back to questioning Jehovah directly like he did in chapter 3. He merely asked why he was born at all if his fate was to be so dreadful. Why cause me to be prosperous? Why cause me to have servants and houses and such honor, and I have served you and loved you, and then why bless me with 10 children, and then to only take it all away? And now he puts the question directly to the one who brought him out of the womb. Yehovah, why did you do it? Remember, before he was just like, oh, I shouldn't have been born. I wish I wasn't born. Now he's asking, why? It's one thing to talk in the air and you know someone's listening. It's another thing to look in face to face and ask, why? Why did you do it? It would have been better had I expired in that womb without anyone ever seeing me. Been better to go from womb to grave. And then verse 20 and 22. Aren't my days few? So stop. Well, actually, there's an explanation point, so it wouldn't be so stop. It's more like, so stop. Right? Leave me alone. I like what he says, so I can cheer up a little. For the moment, the fight in him is gone. Despair prevails. He's asking Yehovah to let up on him just a little before he dies. Give me some grace. Give me some mercy. As if to say, that's the least that you could do, God. If you just leave me alone. Now remember, he's feel his presence. The same hedge of protection is still there. Right? The enemy was allowed to come and destroy him, but God is still there. And he would like that hedge to leave him alone. Because the hedge, the presence, the glory just reminds him, and he would rather that leave him so that he can have a moment of relief. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Was that a moment of horror for Yeshua? Or was the horror going through it and knowing the Father's there and could stop it and didn't? So he asked Yehovah to decease and leave him alone. And he's using imperatives without the normal language of respectful appeal. He's rude. And we're always taught not to be rude to God. But he's a man of integrity, which means if this is how I feel, and God knows how I feel, then if I'm not honest with how I feel, then I'm not a man of integrity. Job is at the end of his rope and needs some space before he dies. And what he says is, that would give me a little cheer. That would give me a moment of saying, thank you for leaving me alone. Again, it's not that he sinned and he's going through something and he knows he's going through something and you know, if you've ever been disciplined by your parents, I'm sure you all have because you're all my age or older. So you know what it is to have some hard stuff coming down on you. Not like today's children necessarily. You knew that you did something wrong. And you knew the penalty of what was going to happen because you did it wrong. So you can't fault them for it, right? It wasn't like they just said, come here, I haven't spanked you for a while, I just need to do it. Need to get some front. No. You knew, right? You didn't do what you were supposed to do. You've had years, especially if you had siblings, you've seen the result of not being obedient. Thank God when you're the number 4, not the number 1. Right? 2 things happen when you're number 4, not number 1. Number 1, you're the tryout child. And it's a stickler. Number 4, yeah, you're tired. You're like, I'll leave you alone. If you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. Right? So they're like, oh, the last one must have been perfect. No, we were just too tired to even recognize that there was that something was happening. Your perspective changes. So when we look at this, Job is at the end of his rope. He needs some space before he dies, and that would bring him a little cheer, which basically means if you give me some space from this constant divine scrutiny and this unrelenting assaults that won't even let me catch my breath, or remember a couple chapters before, swallow my spit. Can you at least just pull back a minute so that I can have a little cheer before I go to the land of darkness and deep gloom? Now, I don't know why it's really not a spiritual thing, but in my brain, you know how your brain works? I went to hee-haw. Because it's gloom, despair, and agony on me. Right? I know it wasn't spiritual, but I can't help where my brain went. I am turning 60. The point is, he was there. He was giving up. He didn't even see that maybe he could walk through this thing, be at the end of this thing. God was going to bring him victory. God's going to bring him a great, powerful change in his life. He couldn't see it. All he knew was, I'm dying. I want to die. I see your presence. I don't want your presence because your presence is reminding me of what I'm going through and reminding me that what I'm going through is for no reason. At least if you left me alone, there's a, purpose. The only thing that he can look at, the only thing he can look forward to is a place of this gloom and chaos. Now, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful if his ever-present, ever-accusing foe would just give him a moment of relief. That's pretty harsh talking to Yehovah. You're telling Yehovah you're my foe. You're telling your father you're assaulting me. And you're telling your father if you could leave me alone, I could be a little bit cheery. Because right now, you in my life and your presence is not causing me anything but pain. So he ends. I think that's enough said. Without even a moment of rest, Zophar needs to get his 2 cents in there. And 2 cents And some dollar bills he does. And Job will have a moment of rebuttal, which he does. What's interesting is, again, I said it before, this is the first cycle of third cycle before a fourth friend speaks up. And then Yehovah comes. And how many know when Yehovah speaks, everybody listens, right? We need to listen because he's trying to tell us something through the book of Job. All right, any questions? All right, let's stand before Yehovah. Somebody say, thank God I'm not Job. God is good all the time. Amen. Pastor Kenny, lead us in I'm glad we're not Job type of song. Glad I'm not Job.
I've got a reason to shout.
Hey! I was in darkness.
And God will be honored to testify. My wonderful reason. I've got a reason to shout. Yeah, I was in darkness and God will be honored to testify. My wonderful reason to shout. We've been through the fire. We've been through the flood. He's been by my side. If you got it all, you got enough to say. I've got a reason to shout. Yeah, I was in darkness and God will be honored to testify. I'm here to testify. I'm here to testify. A wonderful reason to shout.
Praise Yehovah. Enjoy the rest of your week. See y'all on Sabbath. Hallelujah. Amen.